Hello, I'm Nick Giancopoulos, and I'm going to be talking to you about the ceramics program here at K-State. My presentation is pretty brief, or I guess you might say it's distilled. But before we can dive into the program, it's probably helpful to understand a little bit about how our program addresses art, craft, and design. And while this is relevant in most all media, it is particularly relevant to ceramics because perhaps more than any other material, it has very deep roots in all three of those. So in many ways, these are all very different arenas: craft, art, and design. They rely on a different set of vocabulary words, different sets of assessments, and have different intentions. And it's often difficult to characterize and discuss these, but to understand how our program works, it's helpful to add a few definitions. Now, of course, whenever you take something very complex, any idea, and reduce it to something very simple, there are problems. But overall, it is an effective way to begin a conversation about very complex ideas. So art is really about asking questions and highlighting issues in our world. Design is innovation and problem-solving centric. And craft is the practice of our cultural heritage or traditions. But at the core of this curricular ideology, and my belief as well, is an understanding that these areas are not independent or mutually exclusive, but rather that they influence one another, commingle, and ultimately become interdependent in a creative ecosphere. There are very few gestures that reside exclusively in one area, and rather our work tends to reside in a spectrum within this creative ecosphere. And depending on the various projects or bodies of work, what we make can drift or move to different locations. So that means for us in our program, we support a very broad range of student work, from functional pottery with cast glitter embedded neon resin components to tea bowls that talk and pots that have messages of protest. We embrace mixed media installation, sometimes with little or no clay at all. And we teach the scope of quiet craft and the flash of ceramic design. And we embrace countless hybrid possibilities that borrow and blend from all the points in that creative spectrum. So that means in our beginning ceramics classes, students are learning to use plaster molds to slip cast. They work with decals. They are introduced to ceramic stencils and 3D printers and the pottery wheel. They also learn to make clay, spray glazes, and sandblast surfaces. And our final projects are then self-directed by students themselves, allowing them to select processes and ideas that essentially, interest you the most. So we also offer classes where we teach students how to make large projects, 3, 4 feet, even taller, in clay vessels and sculpture, sometimes working on the floor on top of pallets that we use pallet trucks to move from workspace to storage space. We have classes like progressive pots, where students focus on throwing on the wheel to make functional and sculptural work, treating utility as a capsule for concept, content, and communication. And in our intermediate and advanced courses, we have a ceramic design class where students learn to create technical drawings and or 3D modeled prototypes to produce multiples of functional or sculptural objects. We also look at the field of contemporary clay, where students might use raw clay, unfired clay, in installations or performances or even as social practice. So what that looks like in terms of a curricular sort of workflow is actually pretty open. And what you see illustrated here will be implemented in fall 2021, allowing students, after they take the first intro level in ceramics, Intro to the Ceramic Spectrum, or actually ceramics for non-majors, students will then be able to enroll in any of the upper level ceramics area classes. And then finally, after taking 15 credits, if you are emphasizing in ceramics, or excuse me, 12 credits, then you'll take one capstone class where you are focusing on work for your BFA show. The ceramics studio itself, the ceramics program, occupies over 7,000 square feet of communal studios, semi-private and private studios. We have extensive electric, gas, and atmospheric kilns on site, in addition to a satellite 2,000 square foot covered open air kiln facility. We typically have 1 to 3 graduate students and 1 to 3 post-bac students. We also have an annually or biannually rotating artist in residence who teaches classes and informally advises grads and other students. So I'm the area head, and I'm the second most recent hire here at K-State. I've been here for 3.5 years. But before moving here, I spent 4 years teaching ceramic art and design in Beijing at the Central Academy of Fine Art in China. So this is kind of some of the work. Well, this is work from one of my colleagues, and it's pretty amazing to think that he was the lead designer on this project where 20-something of the most powerful heads of states were actually eating off the work that he designed and some of our former students helped with. For the most part, our students worked in the scope of ceramic design, although we characterized it as niche market work for small batch production. So that means that they were not trying to design a cheaper coffee mug, but rather they were designing very exclusive, very expensive work with production runs, perhaps in the hundreds or in the thousands, as opposed to the 100,000s. Sometimes their work is sort of what we might characterize or imagine as sort of traditional Chinese tableware. Other times they would take cues from contemporary studio potters or Western European sort of culture. And in other instances, students would use production methods from ceramic industry or ceramic design to create sculpture or installation. And what we see here, we might characterize as decorative design or sort of design influenced sculpture. And in these last few slides, I'm going to show you some of my work. And this is, some of the work that I did before moving to China. I tend to work in projects or in series. And this image is of sheets of paper that were dipped in liquid clay and then hung on lines. In my work, I tend to embrace a pretty wide range of materials and practices that are pretty beyond the traditional scope of ceramics. And during my undergraduate and graduate studies, I often incorporated the use of video projections or monitors within my installations. And of course, my time in China influenced my work a lot. I started using Chinese factory-produced decals for industrially made ceramic tableware, and I started collaging them with hobbycraft decals from America and Europe. And what you're seeing here are ceramic decals that have been collaged and fired on very large handmade porcelain tiles that were then framed and hung on the wall. So since moving back to America, I continue to work in this vein. I started working with my former studio assistants who were still in China to import some of these really amazing traditional porcelain tiles for me to continue working with. And most recently, kind of going from a thread that I started in China, I've developed this body of work called Saccharin. And it uses really sort of heavy duty, crazy sort of glaze that's fired onto the already fired ceramic tile and then working with decaled surfaces on top of it. And translating the chemicals from the glazes that I was using in China was really difficult to do here in America, but I've recently had some pretty exciting breakthroughs. So that's pretty much it for the introduction to our studio. And I guess I would say, if you're interested in seeing what we're up to, be sure and follow us on Instagram at K-State Clay. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.